It was one of those mornings that made you feel like the world was trying to bribe you into being happy. Clear skies, soft sunlight spilling over the neighborhood, the faint smell of freshly cut grass drifting in from somewhere down the block. The kind of morning where you half expect to see kids on bikes, a mailman whistling, all those postcard cliches. I'd just gotten back from my usual Saturday coffee run. Lauren had been out earlier, taking her car somewhere. Errands, she'd said, but she hadn't been specific. I didn't think much of it at the time. Weekends had their own rhythm, and we often did our own thing for a few hours before syncing up later. I walked up the driveway, still sipping my latte, when I caught something out of the corner of my eye. The back seat of her car wasn't empty. Draped across it, in plain view through the rear passenger window, was a light men's sweater. Not the bulky kind you'd wear in deep winter, but the soft, fitted type you throw on for cool mornings. Pale gray, fine knit. I stopped without really meaning to. The color wasn't anything unusual, but the sweater itself, I'd never seen it before. I'm not someone who notices every item of clothing in the house, but after years together you get a mental inventory, especially when it comes to things your partner might wear. This didn't match anything Lauren owned, and it was definitely not mine. Curiosity nudged me closer. I opened the car door and reached in, intending to pick it up, maybe check the tag or size. The fabric was warm, freshly worn warm. Not sat in the sun warm either. It was the kind of heat that lingers from body contact. For some reason, that detail landed harder than it should have. I held it for a moment, feeling its weight, noticing a faint scent I couldn't place. Not perfume, not detergent, something more neutral, like clean skin mixed with a trace of cologne. I glanced toward the house. The front door was open, and I could hear Lauren moving around inside. When I stepped into the kitchen, sweater still in hand, she was at the counter pouring water into the kettle. She looked up and smiled, like she'd been expecting me to walk in that exact second. "What's that?" I asked, my voice casual but my eyes on her. She glanced at the sweater, and for a split second, so quick I almost doubted I saw it, there was the tiniest flicker in her expression. Then it was gone, replaced by an easy shrug. "Oh, traffic was awful today," she said, almost overlapping my question. I almost had to park 2 blocks away, and then this guy in front of me kept, and just like that, we were talking about construction downtown. I let her words wash over me, my mind only half there. She gestured with her hands, describing blocked lanes and detours. She never once acknowledged the sweater. Not even a token, "Oh, that's probably so-and-so's." I could have pressed her. I could have cut in and said, "No, seriously? Whose is this?" But instead, I just nodded along, even threw in a few sympathetic sounds about how the city was a mess lately. It wasn't that I believed her. There was nothing to believe because she hadn't actually answered anything. It was that I didn't want to push. Not yet. Still, something about the exchange gnawed at me. In a normal relationship, you'd expect the answer to come easily, even lazily. "Oh, that's Brian's. I gave him a ride." Or, "Oh, I picked this up from the cleaners by mistake." But instead, Lauren sidestepped it completely, sliding the conversation into safer waters before I could even take a second breath. After a few minutes, she set the kettle down and asked about my coffee run, as if nothing unusual had happened. I told her it was fine, that the barista had gotten my order right for once. We went through the motions. Weekend small talk, light smiles, but my thoughts kept looping back to that sweater, sitting there like a prop in a play I hadn't realized I was in. Later, after she went upstairs, I stood at the kitchen sink staring out into the yard. I replayed the moment in my head, the way her eyes flickered for that fraction of a second, the too smooth pivot into a completely different topic. It didn't feel like the kind of harmless omission you brush off. It felt intentional, controlled. I told myself it was nothing, just a random garment that had found its way into her car. People forget things. People borrow things. But the truth was, I'd never known Lauren to be careless about appearances. She kept her car clean, organized. A stranger's sweater lying openly on the seat didn't fit. The kettle whistled upstairs where she must have left it. I found myself wondering if she'd come down and quietly move the sweater later, maybe without realizing I was paying attention. That would have told me a lot. I didn't check. I didn't need to, not then. The moment was already lodged in my mind, not as a clear accusation but as something sharper. A hook in the skin you can't quite remove, tugging every time you move. It's strange how something so small can alter the air between two people. That morning, before the sweater, the day had felt light, unremarkable. After it, the light was still there, but it seemed to fall at a different angle, casting longer shadows than it should have. I didn't know it then, but I just stepped onto a path I wouldn't be able to leave. And all it took to start walking was a warm piece of fabric and the wrong kind of silence. It didn't happen all at once. After the sweater, I started listening. Not for dramatic slip ups, but for the tiny rhythms of our life that had shifted when I wasn't looking. In my head, I replayed the last few months the way you scrub through a video, pausing on frames that don't fit. The late nights at the office multiplied. Quarter end, she'd say, like it was a season only she understood. She'd come home after midnight with a story already loaded, the kind of polished narrative that anticipates follow ups before you ask them. When I did ask, she'd smile, kiss my cheek, tell me she was exhausted, and drift upstairs with her phone in her hand like it needed tucking in. Then came the business trips, 2-day sprints to cities where her company had clients but never meetings I could verify. The first time, she texted updates about flights and bad coffee. The second time, her phone was dying more often. The third time, it seemed to die entirely. She said hotel Wi-Fi was trash. Meanwhile, the read receipts that used to pop up like clockwork went dark. People travel. Batteries die. But the silence felt curated, like an exhibit arranged to hide fingerprints. The car started holding on to smells that weren't ours. A trace of unfamiliar cologne, clean but insistent, clung to the upholstery for days. I told myself it was from a rideshare or a coworker's hug. I even rolled the windows down one afternoon and drove to air it out, like I could rinse doubt with fresh air. The scent returned the next week, faint but stubborn, as if the car itself had learned a new name. Boxes began appearing at the door, expensive ones. Fashion brands I recognized by logo more than by lifestyle. New shoes wrapped in careful tissue paper. Lingerie I only saw because the receipts landed in our shared email before she started routing them elsewhere. A treat-yourself moment, she said, winking. She'd disappear into the bedroom and emerge in delicate lace that used to be a message for me. Now it felt like rehearsal for someone else. At home, she kept her distance. Self-care turned into a second job. Facials. Standing appointments at a salon she once called too precious. A gym bag started living by the door like a dog waiting to be walked. Partners should cheer for improvements, I know, but the version of Lauren who came home shimmering and alert kept saving her softness for the outside world. With me, she was precise, polite. Money told its own story. Tiny charges became patterns. Rides across town at odd hours, boutique restaurants we'd never tried together. A wine bar in a neighborhood she used to roll her eyes at. When I asked where she'd eaten with the team, she named a steakhouse across the city from the charge on our joint card. The old me would have let it slide. The new me opened a spreadsheet. I hated that version of myself, bookkeeper of his own marriage, but numbers don't gaslight. They just wait to be read. Her stories got shorter as the details around her got louder. She took calls on the porch, pacing, laughing softly in a register she rarely used with me. If I opened the door to hand her tea, she'd turn away, then hang up with a talk soon before I heard a name. Client, she'd say. New initiative. I stopped asking which one. The bed told on us too or on me. She began sleeping in the deepest part of the mattress, like a swimmer hugging the lane rope. When I reached for her, she'd murmur something about an early morning and fold into that tight curl that leaves no space for hands or apologies. In daylight, her affection was public and generic. The fights, when they came, were frictionless. Not screaming, not plates, just corporate conflict management. I'd say I missed her. She'd thank me for sharing and remind me that adulthood was busy. I'd bring up the phone going silent. She'd note that large clients can't be kept waiting. If I mentioned the cologne in the car, she'd smile and say I had a sensitive nose. And maybe I did. Maybe that was the problem. I could smell what we wouldn't say. I tried to reset us. I booked a weekend at the beach town we used to love, boardwalk fries and a motel balcony where you talk about everything because there's nothing else to do. She said she had a rollout Monday and couldn't risk being far from the city. Let's rain check, she said, already opening her calendar. The rain never checked. The weekend passed, and the city kept her like a secret. I noticed micro-edits. A new passcode after years of sharing. A second credit card that never showed up in the mail but appeared in her wallet. A perfume that layered too well over something muskier, something not hers. In the bathroom drawer, tucked under spare razors, I found a tiny velvet pouch with earrings I'd never seen her wear. The old photos around the house turned into museum pieces. Us at my brother's wedding, her head on my shoulder. I studied the frames like an art critic, searching for proof that a different ending had ever been possible. It's ridiculous to interrogate a photograph, but I was starving for something honest. There were moments when I decided I was wrong. On Wednesdays, when she cooked the pasta I loved and left her phone face up like a truce flag. On Saturday mornings, when we split a newspaper and argued about headlines. In those little reprieves, I could believe we were still reachable. Then the spell would break. An Uber idling at 9:47 p.m. Her voice going careful, the porch door clicking shut, and I'd be back inside the counting. I didn't hire a private investigator or put a tracker on her phone. Maybe I should have. Instead, I became my own quiet surveillance, keeping a ledger you pretend you aren't keeping. I learned the weight of her lies by how lightly she said them. I learned the shape of her absences by the space they left in a room. From the outside, our days still looked ordinary. We paid bills. We showed up for birthdays with decent wine and practiced smiles. We discussed whether the hydrangeas needed pruning, whether to fix the dripping faucet or just learn to love the sound. If you filmed our life without audio and played it back, you might think we were fine. But the sound was the point. The silence between the sounds was the point. And when I finally put my ear to our life and listened, all I could hear was that persistent ticking, the one I'd been ignoring. Each beat was a question I hadn't asked. Each beat was a thing she didn't volunteer. And every time the second hand moved, it returned to the same center. The sweater, still warm, and the way she smiled around it like she could steer me past the obvious if I let her. I wasn't ready to accuse her. Not yet. But suspicion settled into me the way damp settles into a house. Quietly, relentlessly, until the walls remember. And I knew, as surely as I knew our street name or the color of our front door, that something was coming. The question wasn't whether I'd find it. The question was what it would cost to see it clearly. It didn't arrive like lightning. It arrived as a push notification. A few days after the sweater, I was on my lunch break, scrolling without purpose, when my phone buzzed with the little chime that means someone you barely know has decided the world should see their weekend. It was an acquaintance from college, friend of a friend territory, who has a gift for documenting sunsets and cocktails like their personal achievements. The thumbnail showed ocean glare and umbrellas, a shaky horizon, laughter off camera. I tapped it open. The clip was one of those stitched stories. 15 seconds here, 10 there. Strangers clinking glasses at a seaside cafe. The camera drifted, drunk on daylight, sweeping past a row of white tables and a blue sliver of water that could have been anywhere, until it landed careless, honest on her. Lauren. She sat at the edge of the frame, not posed, just caught mid-gesture. Hair pulled back, sunglasses tipped onto her head. Her smile was the one I used to think belonged to me, the unguarded kind that shows up when she forgets she's being watched. But she wasn't alone. A younger guy sat across from her, maybe late 20s, easy posture. His hand was on the table, and Lauren's rested on top of it, light but definite, the way you steady a page in a breeze. My eyes snagged on his sweater, pale gray, fine knit, sleeves pushed to the forearms. Even through the compression of Instagram, I knew it like I'd known it in our driveway. The sound in the video was mostly wind and bad music, but you could hear laughter, hers, and then a low reply I couldn't make out. The camera jittered, drifted toward a plate of oysters, then back, as if the acquaintance realized she'd caught something she shouldn't. Too late. Lauren leaned in, squeezed his fingers, and kissed him. No hesitation. Not a peck stolen in a shadow. She kissed him the way you do when hiding is no longer part of the thrill. I watched the clip twice, then 3 times, cycling through disbelief, shock, denial, a brief and stupid hope that I was seeing a look-alike. But there she was, in a dress I recognized from our closet, beneath the same sky we had promised to share in better weather. The brain tries to be kind at first. Maybe this is a client dinner. Maybe it's a cousin. Maybe the hand-holding is European and the kiss is, what? A cultural greeting? But the brain gets tired, and the eyes keep doing their job. The guy turned his wrist and, for a second, the sweater's cuff slid back to reveal a tan line where a watch usually lived. That little detail, ordinary and specific, anchored the whole thing to reality. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't an edit. I didn't notice I'd stopped breathing until my chest remembered to ask for air. The office kitchen went quiet in that way sound does when your body is busy bracing. I set the phone on the counter like it might bite. I wanted to call her right then. I wanted to send the video with a single question mark and let it detonate in her pocket. But messages, once sent, can be harvested for excuses. She'd say it was old. She'd say it was out of context. She'd say I was overreacting to pixels and perspective. Instead, I **Ted the story. Every segment, every angle, before it expired into the land of curated amnesia. I saved the whole thing to a folder with a name so boring I wouldn't even look at it by accident. Then I watched it again. Lauren's body language did the explaining she'd never volunteer. The lean toward him, the softened shoulders, the way her mouth found his like they had a map. You can forge words. You can't forge ease. My phone buzzed with a meeting reminder, a countdown clock to normal life. I put the device face down and stared at the laminate countertop until the flecks looked like constellations. When I finally stood, my legs felt unreliable, like stairs after the movie ends. On the walk home that night, the city felt foreign. I knew the storefronts and the cracks in the sidewalk. What I didn't know was my life. When I reached the house, the lights were warm, polite, the way a staged home looks when the realtor wants you to feel safe. Lauren wasn't there yet. Her text arrived 2 minutes later. Running a bit late, traffic insane. Want me to grab anything for dinner? I looked at the words long enough to feel their weightlessness. Maybe she was in traffic. Maybe the cafe was yesterday. The timeline didn't matter. The certainty did. I typed all good and deleted it. I started sure, pick up, and deleted that too. In the end I wrote, drive safe. Felt like telling a storm to buckle its seatbelt. When she came in, she kissed my cheek, professional. She set a paper bag on the counter, takeout, proof of an errand, and unpacked boxes with the easy choreography of our shared kitchen. We ate. She told a story about an impossible client, the kind with a calendar full of urgent flags. I nodded at the right beats. I asked 2 questions. She answered both without blinking. The video played in my head on loop, a screensaver I couldn't shake. After dinner, she took a call on the porch. Through the glass, her mouth shaped a smile for someone not me. I pulled up the acquaintances page again, half expecting the story to be gone. It was still there, preserved until the clock ran out. Her laughter braided with wind and gulls and the clink of ice in a glass. I kept watching. Somewhere between her call and the dishwasher's gentle hiss, I stopped resisting the obvious. Every suspicion I'd banked. Late nights, dead phones, the cologne in our car, aligned with the ease of 2 hands finding each other at a sunny table. You don't kiss a coworker that way. You don't hold a cousin's hand like a promise. There's a version of this where I explode, where I confront her with righteous anger and a raised voice that finally makes the walls honest. But what settled in me wasn't fire. It was a kind of winter, a clearing wind. I felt very awake and very far away, as if I were on the sidewalk looking through our windows like a stranger. Later, in bed, she curled toward the cold edge and fell asleep quickly, as if peace were something you can choose. I stared at the ceiling until the plaster looked like surf. At some point, I opened my phone in the dark and watched the clip one last time, giving myself over to the finality of it. There it was, proof not in a text or a rumor, but in daylight. Proof with shadows and water and the ordinary clatter of plates. Proof wearing the same pale sweater I had touched with my own hands. By morning the story expired, as all stories do. The fact of it didn't. It lived in me now, not as a what-if but as a ledger entry with numbers that reconcile. I made coffee and added sugar I didn't need. The street outside was the same. Gravity wasn't. I didn't tell her. Not that day. I tucked the evidence away and carried it like a stone in my pocket, heavy enough to remind me with every step. You aren't guessing anymore. You know. Slowly. I didn't tell her I'd seen the video. Not that night, not the next morning. Instead, I decided to treat the truth like a savings account, something to accrue interest on before I cashed it in. Confrontation, especially with Lauren, was a theater she'd always been good at. She could cry on cue, redirect blame, and make even my most grounded suspicions feel like paranoia. If I went at her empty-handed, she'd control the script. So I stayed quiet. I played the part of the husband distracted by work, by errands, by the everyday noise of life. But under that still surface, I was making moves. First came the finances. I'd learned years ago that our comfort was a web of shared accounts, checking, savings, a couple of credit cards we both had access to. It wasn't just money. It was oxygen. Quietly, without ceremony, I started cutting off the valves. One lunch break, I walked into the bank where we'd opened our first joint account and told the manager I wanted my own. Solo, secure, with every digital safeguard they offered. I shifted my direct deposits there and rerouted the trickle from our savings to a new account in my name. The next day, I closed the joint credit card we'd used for everything from groceries to weekend trips. I opened a new one and kept it in my wallet without mentioning it. The old one, her old one, went dead without warning. I told myself this was about protecting assets, but it was more than that. It was about shifting the balance of the air we breathed. When the coffee run or the cab ride suddenly had to come from her pocket, she'd feel it. Within a week, I saw the first crack in her confidence. We met at a cafe on a Saturday morning, her suggestion, and when the bill came, she reached for the card that no longer worked. The waiter stood patiently while she fished around in her bag, finally pulling out a crumpled 10 and a handful of coins. "Forgot I maxed that one out," she muttered, eyes on the table. It was a small lie, one I didn't challenge, but I caught the flash of irritation behind it. She wasn't used to being inconvenienced. At home, I cut off her access to the savings account entirely. That was the real shift. I pictured her logging in one afternoon, expecting to see the cushion we'd built, only to find the balance at zero. Not empty, just moved somewhere she couldn't follow. I didn't gloat. I didn't change my tone. But there was a subtle recalibration in our house now. She'd lived for years with the quiet assurance that I was the safety net. That if she fell, I'd be there to catch her without asking why she'd jumped. That illusion was gone. A few days later, she tried to order takeout and came into the living room holding her phone like it had personally betrayed her. "Did you change the account passwords?" she asked. Not angry, cautious. "I updated security," I said, eyes still on the TV. "Some charges I didn't recognize last month." "What charges?" Her voice sharpened. I finally looked at her. "Does it matter? It's under control now." She stood there for a beat too long, as if weighing whether to push. Then she just said, "Right," and went upstairs. That night, I heard her pacing in the guest room. Phone calls hushed and clipped. She'd been working from that room more often. At least that's what she said. But lately the lights stayed on late and the calls stopped when I walked past. The next morning, she made a point of paying for her own cab to work. I watched from the kitchen window as she climbed in, the driver popping the trunk for her bag. She dressed sharper than usual. Tailored coat, hair set just so. But her shoulders were stiff. If the sweater in her car had been the first fracture, this was the sound of the foundation settling. It wasn't revenge I was after. Not exactly. Revenge is loud and burns quick. I wanted something quieter, something that rewrote the terms of our life without me having to spell them out. If she noticed the air thinning, she'd have to decide whether to ask why, or just learn to breathe less. One evening, she came home later than usual, setting her bag down a little too carefully. "Busy day?" I asked, rinsing dishes. "Just, meetings ran long." She opened the fridge, scanned, closed it. "We need groceries." Pick some up tomorrow, I said. You've got the card. A pause. I'm a little tight this week. I shrugged. Then I guess we get creative. She didn't like that answer. She made a point of scrolling on her phone for the rest of the night, the glow of the screen reflecting off eyes that didn't look at me once. By the end of the month, the energy in the house had shifted. She was polite but brittle, as if every interaction cost her something. I didn't chase her for conversation. I let the silence do its work. Because here's the thing about people who build their lives on control. They hate when the ground shifts under them. And nothing makes the ground shift faster than taking away the unspoken guarantees they've stopped appreciating. Lauren hadn't yet realized I was playing a long game. That every closed account, every changed password, every casually denied convenience was another step in reclaiming the space she'd been eroding for months. She thought I was distracted, maybe even pulling away. She didn't see that I was clearing the field, making room for whatever came next. And when the day came that I finally laid the truth on the table, I wanted her to feel it without wondering whether she could land on her feet. I wanted her to already know, deep in the quiet part of her mind, that the net was gone. I didn't hire a housekeeper to make a point. I hired her because the house felt like a waiting room, too clean in the corners, neglected in the places we actually lived. Dishes lingered, laundry half-folded, the quiet sitting heavy in the rooms where we used to talk. If I was going to keep my distance from Lauren without letting the place slide into chaos, I needed help that wasn't emotional. Practical help. Neutral help. Her name was Martha. Mid-50s, careful eyes, the kind of posture you'd trust with your grandmother's china. She came recommended by a neighbor who swore Martha could organize a junk drawer like a crime scene tech. When she arrived for the trial day, she took one slow walk through the house, not judging, just mapping. She asked 2 questions, how we liked our shirts folded and whether we had allergies, and then set to work like she'd been here for years. The first afternoon felt like an exhale I didn't know I'd been holding. Counters cleared, towels rehung, the hum of a vacuum smoothing out the edges of the day. I stayed out of her way, answering when she asked where something belonged, pointing to shelves, shrugging when I didn't care. Lauren came home that evening and stopped short in the doorway. The house had a different sound to it, a tidiness you can hear. "What's this?" she asked, glancing from the gleaming sink to the woman wiping down the dining table. "This is Martha," I said. "She'll be helping around the house." Martha looked up, offered a polite hello, and kept wiping. Lauren smiled a shade too bright. "Oh, nice to meet you." She set her bag down with a neat little click. "You didn't mention hiring anyone." "I didn't know I needed to," I said. "It's the house. It needs upkeep." "Right?" she said, the words stretched thin. "Of course." The next days settled into a new rhythm. I left for work. Martha arrived, order returned. Towels in color families, silverware nested, the junk drawer demoted to citizen. I paid her at the end of each week with a thank you and an envelope. She nodded once, tucked it away, and left the place smelling like lemons. Lauren tolerated Martha the way you tolerate a neighbor's yappy dog, pretending not to hear it while it works on your last nerve. She started small. Moving a vase Martha had centered on the table 2 inches to the left. Shuffling the labeled bins in the pantry so rice became pasta and pasta became miscellaneous. Leaving a used wine glass in the sink after Martha had finished for the day, like a signature. Then the cancellations began. Twice I came home to find a text from Martha. "Lauren said today wasn't a good day. See you Friday instead." When I asked Lauren, she shrugged. "I had a call. I needed quiet." Her tone made it sound like I'd hired a brass band. I rescheduled. Martha came on Friday, restored the map, and left her quiet competence behind like music you only notice when it stops. One morning, I found the trash can without a bag and the fresh box of liners hidden behind the recycling bins. Another day, the vacuum's plug was snapped at the prongs. "Accident," Lauren said, eyes wide. "Must have caught on a chair." Martha said nothing, but I saw the arithmetic in her face. How long you keep a job where the furniture moves when you turn away. The thing about quiet wars is they need witnesses. Lauren wanted me to notice without forcing me to name it. I obliged by noticing everything and naming nothing. When she left coffee rings on the counter an hour after Martha had polished it, I wiped them up. When she forgot to leave the key under the mat, I drove home on my lunch break to let Martha in and apologized like the weather had misbehaved. The morning it boiled over, it was almost laughably small. Martha had taken the trash out after one of Lauren's nights of people dropping by. I hadn't known about the people, but the empty bottles and the faint echo of bass told a story that didn't need guests to testify. Martha had already loaded the dishwasher to the gills when Lauren wandered in, sunglasses on, hair perfect in that way you earn with time you didn't spend sleeping. "Could you handle the patio?" Lauren asked like Martha was part of the cabinetry. "There's glass out there." Martha nodded, took the broom, and stepped onto the deck. 10 minutes later she came back in, holding a sticky plastic cup between two fingers. "The bin's full," she said. "Where should I put the rest?" Lauren didn't look up from her phone. "Just leave it for later. It's fine." Martha set the cup on the counter with a care that said it wasn't fine. "I won't be able to finish the kitchen if it sits." Lauren sighed, the kind of sigh that feels staged for a microphone. "Then skip the kitchen. Or come back tomorrow." Martha's spine straightened by a degree you could measure. "I'm scheduled today." Something in me clicked into place. Not fury, alignment. I'd spent weeks removing oxygen from the parts of our life Lauren took for granted. This was about keeping that air breathable for the people who actually respected it. "That's enough," I said, stepping in. "Martha, take the bin from the garage. I'll haul the full one after work." Then I looked at Lauren. "If you host, you clean. That's the rule going forward." Lauren lowered her phone, blinking. "Since when do we have rules?" "Since now." The room went very still, the way a soundstage goes still before the red light comes on. Lauren's smile tried to reappear and didn't make it past the corners. After Martha left that afternoon, Lauren found me in the office. "We need to talk about boundaries," she said, hands on the doorframe like she owned the word. "Agreed," I said, closing my laptop. "Here are mine. Martha works here when she's scheduled. Nobody cancels her except me. If you throw a party, you tell me first and you clean up after. Dishes don't sit overnight. Trash goes out. If her tools break, we replace them without a story attached." "Are you implying?" "I'm avoiding implication," I said softly. "I'm setting terms." She stared at me like I'd grown an extra language. "Since when are you like this?" "I've always been like this," I said. "You're just now listening." She laughed once, sharp. "Fine. Your house, your rules." The words were meant to cut, but they landed like a blueprint. The house had always been ours, but in the space she'd hollowed out with lies, I was rebuilding load-bearing walls. The next morning, I asked Martha to come by before 9. When she arrived, I met her at the door with coffee and a contract I'd typed the night before. Simple, plain English, hours and rate, and a clause about cancellations requiring 24 hours notice unless it came from me. She read it slowly, tracing a line with her finger like a careful reader does a holy text. "You don't need to do this," she said. "I do," I said, "and I want to make you permanent if you're willing." Her eyes searched mine for a catch. Finding none, she nodded. "All right." Lauren came down the stairs mid-signature. She paused on the landing, took in the pen, the paper, the steadiness. "What is this?" "Employment," I said. "Martha's part of the household. Permanently." Lauren let out a light, theatrical scoff. "You're hiring staff now?" "I'm acknowledging work that already exists," I said, "and making sure it gets respected." Martha gathered the papers without a flourish. "I'll start with the kitchen," she said, and disappeared down the hall like a small weather system restoring barometric pressure. That evening the house felt different. Not just clean, aligned. The pantry labels stayed where she'd put them. The vacuum had a new cord. The trash can had a liner and a backup roll tucked neatly behind it. The guest room door stayed closed. Lauren didn't speak to me at dinner. She pushed her food around her plate as if the arrangement could turn back time. When she set her fork down, it made a neat, declarative sound against the plate. "Is this the new normal?" she asked at last. "It's the honest one," I said. "You can live in it or not." She stared at me for a long time, searching my face for the soft place she used to land. There wasn't one. Not for this. After she went upstairs, I walked through the quiet rooms and realized the atmosphere had changed in a way I hadn't expected. It wasn't just colder. It was clearer, as if we'd finally opened a window that had been painted shut for years, and the house remembered how to breathe without her pretending to hold it together.